Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null. Once again, I'd like to do a special presentation. And that's because years ago, I began a series and I ran it for almost 40 years. It was called Mastering Life, where I would take a topic that most of the people who responded from my radio audience said was important to them. And would I do it in greater depth? And that's what I'm doing today. And I'm also filming this, and this will be up on Gary Null YouTube, and it'll be on other platforms that I have. And even right now, many of you are watching it on our Progressive Commentary Hour. And you can go to GaryNull.com and download it if you'd like to share it with other people. It's just one piece of this puzzle about life. I've titled this Happiness in the Age of Illusion, because so much of what we're told today is about illusion. How many times have I counseled someone who was very ill and frequently no longer be able to be treated with orthodox medicine, was told to go, put your life in order. It's time for hospice care. And so this was their Hail Mary. Is there anything that is possible? And I always start with, yes, there's always a possibility. That's where faith comes in. That's where belief comes in. That's where everything else has failed. So why don't we open that door? What's that door? Well, today that door is happiness. Well, I think I've been happy most of my life, and indeed you may have been. But frequently, there's an illusion to this. I wrote an epigraph some time ago. It was called Happiness is the Quiet Truth That Remains When Illusion Dissolves. What do I mean by this? Long ago, at the very beginning of my career, I had a little tiny health food store called Creative Health Foods, 108th and Broadway. And by the way, that was 1967, and it just closed because of COVID 2 years ago. And one day a customer came in, and she gave me a little tiny booklet. And it was not by any major publisher, but the title was intriguing. It says, Happy People Rarely Get Cancer. And that stuck with me. And about 2 years later, I would meet a person, Dr. Lawrence Leshan, who was a well-known psychologist, and he was the first to come up with the idea, at least that I'm aware of, and publish the results, that when he would interview an individual, women only, who had no health risks for cancer, none, wasn't their family, and there was nothing in their lifestyle. They didn't smoke and drink. In fact, most of these people were very healthy. Now, mind you, this is way back, over half a century ago. But what he found was this. After about a half-hour conversation, he would ask them certain key questions about, do you do a lot of things for other people? Do you feel responsible for other people? And if they said yes, then the follow-up question was very important. Do you always get some appreciation, some recognition for the sacrifices you make in your own life, the responsibilities that you take on of other people, even if they could have taken those on for themselves? And that's where the rub came. And that's where his insights, unique at the time, and now accepted, that people who do things for other people on a regular basis, we're not talking about one and gone, just on a regular basis, long after the person could have done these for themselves, how do they feel? And if they feel unappreciated, he noted those were the people most likely to have either arthritis or breast cancer. And he was right. Statistically, right up at the top. Later, when I was a junior scientist at the Institute of Applied Biology, I met a Dr. Gerald Kessler, a leading psychiatrist who also worked for the city of New York as one of its top psychiatrists. And I asked him about this. Do you believe at this time that your thoughts alone, nothing else, just your thoughts, are able to cause cancer? And he did not have an answer. And because it hadn't been proven, we didn't even know about epigenetics. Epi, the larger environment you're in, can impact the genetics, literally reprogram your genes to make you either healthier, more optimistic, more in tune with your potential, or it can work against you, depending upon 7 generations back of people in your genetic line. So we had many discussions on this. So I began to do research at that time. We're talking 1971. I began to do research, and he'd come by the lab and I'd share the results. What happens when friends of mine who were psychiatrists or psychologists, Dr. Donald Mullins, the Albert Ellis Center, one of the most respected psychological centers in America, Dr. Elaine Kahn from Columbia University, highly respected, an author, and there was Dr. Martin Feldman, who was board certified in neurology, but also qualified in psychiatry. These were either psychologists or psychiatrists, 5 to 6 of them, who didn't believe that a person could will themselves into a disease. Stress, yes. Depression, anxiety, yes. And therefore talking about their background and helping them with talk therapy, because these people didn't use pharmaceuticals. That would come a little later with Valium, what was known as mommy's little helper. Yeah, it was deadly for a lot of people and its capacity for addiction. But what I did is I did something different. I focused upon sitting with the people who were in therapy already, some for 20 to 30 years, but they were functional. So they might be smiling on the outside and in great pain on the inside. And we focused upon the idea that would become epigenetics and what in their life was unsatisfactory. And what I found was a pattern. And what was missing, at least from my perspective, was happiness. They were doing things to create happiness, but it was something out there, not inside. After a year of this, I began to incorporate this into my own clinical practice of working with people. I was a registered dietitian, clinical board certified nutritionist, later doctorate, PhD in human nutrition and public health science, multiple disciplines. And so here I was. So everything that I had heard years before, I found to be true. And that's why this discussion, most of it extemporaneous, is important, because there are conversations we must return to again and again. Why? Not because they are comfortable, but because they illuminate something essential about the human condition. Happiness is one of those conversations. And yet, in all our modern discussions about well-being, ambition, success, our identity, what we've achieved, people say, she's really at the top of her game. He climbed that ladder. He's acknowledged as the best in the field. Our progress as human beings through this process of life. We often overlook the foundation that held earlier generations together, the quiet structures of morality, ethics, community, and responsibility. So when I speak about happiness today, I often begin by reflecting on the world I grew up in, the world that many of you grew up in, not because nostalgia is a refuge, but because memory is a teacher and a powerful one. There was a time when the purpose of a person's life was not to accumulate, not to ascend, not to display, not to brag, but simply to live with decency, dignity, and integrity. You live by the example of your father, your grandfather, your grandmother, your great-grandmother. Life was not about self-promotion. It was about belonging to a family, a faith, a neighborhood, a community, of values. In the working towns of America, entire generations labored in the same factories and fields. In Parkersburg, West Virginia, where 2 of my uncles worked as engineers in a shovel factory, OM shovel factory. No one measured happiness by how much they owned. You needed enough to provide a quality of life. But you didn't have to compete with your neighbors to feel worthy. I've got a bigger car, more expensive car. Look at my house. It's 500 square feet larger than your 1,500 square feet. We didn't think it. We didn't do it. We didn't envy it. We didn't resent it. You didn't chase attention or cultivate a personal brand. You didn't believe that love depended upon performance. We did simple things. I can remember cutting grass every Saturday morning, delivering newspapers at dawn, joining the Boy Scouts, and going towards an Eagle Scout. There weren't trivial activities, no. They were rites of passage that shaped character. People looked at you and said, that's a good kid. Or looked at her and said, she's a good girl. And it meant something. It meant you cared about yourself. You carried yourself with integrity. Life was quieter then, far less stressful, and people were taught not to envy others. Our parents had endured the Great Depression. They survived the privations of World War II. They learned to be grateful for small things. Everything was a hand-me-down. Everything was, well, we can fix it, or someone we know will fix it. We were very self-sufficient. Family held you together. Faith held you together. These were not abstractions. They were the pillars of a meaningful existence. Good luck finding that in common today. But something dramatic shifted over the last 30 years. Not gradually, but radically. Today, quality of life has been replaced by standard of living. Meaning is replaced by performance. Character is replaced by identity. And the loss has been profound. A new generation grew up believing that happiness required more and more education, more achievement, more status, more recognition. Parents worked themselves to exhaustion to ensure their children would make it, be accepted, be appreciated, respected, only to realize the cost. You had a trade-off. Their children gained ambition, but lost belonging. They inherited opportunity, but lost balance. They were raised to succeed, but not to be whole. I've seen families where the parents achieved everything, prestigious degrees, high salaries, social status, and the children were uprooted, lonely, and adrift. I know that personally because across the street from the Institute for Applied Biology, where I was first a junior, then a senior research fellow, finally the director of the anti-aging department. Across the street was Trafalgar Hospital, and I was working there a lot. I was helping many of the patients. They also had a director of their division of rehabilitation for drug addicts or addicts of different types. You either could go to Rikers Island or you can go into rehab. People chose rehab. The majority of these young people were from affluent families, successful families, lawyers, doctors, engineers, CPAs, professors. I had a lot of them. And I had a very high success rate because I dealt with what was the missing piece in their life that allowed them to feel so disconnected from true meaning and purpose that they wanted to give pain to other people by showing them how they could self-destroy themselves, projecting the guilt that would follow to the other people. Even when they said, I'd rather kill myself and know my parents who have completely ignored me, thought they could buy me with my love with money. I had tutors, I had everyone. I wasn't a terribly bright student, but you wouldn't have known that because the money that my parents got, they gave to a university, very prestigious when I got in there. And everybody tried to hide my ignorance. I now resent all that. Anyhow, so when you are, again, I've seen families where the parents achieved everything, prestigious degrees, high salaries, social status, and the children were uprooted, lonely, and adrift. That's not good. That can lead to addictions. When you pour all of your energy into climbing something, inevitably you get lost at the base. Your foundational beliefs are no longer important. Today, getting ahead, making more, showing people, bragging, becoming an exhibitionist. Today's young adults often wake up with no sense of purpose, They don't know who they are. They're anxious, easily overwhelmed, and spiritually unanchored, not because they're weak, but because the world they inherited is chaotic and rootless and selfish and self-absorbed and highly competitive. This generation and the one after them, the millennials, has been raised in a culture that praises independence but neglects their interdependence. They grew up with entertainment instead of engagement, attention instead of affection, stimulation instead of structure. Many of them feel entitled, but that entitlement is often camouflaged for something deeper, a loss of identity, a loss of direction, a loss of grounding. Recently, I met a 38-year-old man that I was counseling for a health issue, and he was living with his mother out of compassion, partly, but also out of collapse. His life had collapsed. He had no place else to go. He had been homeless. So he went to his mother, who was living, because of her homelessness, with her sister. The mother was sleeping on the couch, while her son, the 38-year-old, was sleeping in the bedroom. He had no motivation, no drive, no sense of meaning or purpose, and yet all their comforts are met. That is the paradox. Comfort without purpose leads to spiritual paralysis. When I talk to him about, and the mother as well, it is generational. They grew up poor, uneducated, and took things at face value that, well, this is the way it's always been. We've always eaten, deep fried food or sugary food. Even a jar of cherries has got sugar in it, preserved. Not good outcomes. But they feel that is the life they've been given, and they're not going to change it. We have become the most addicted generation in American history, not merely addicted to substances, but addiction to distraction, validation, stimulation, attention. Reality programs have replaced role models, surgically enhanced influencers, and all the people hanging on to the arms of a celebrity knowing that they got a rich payday coming to them. And they all look the same, act the same. You wouldn't know that the quarterback or the front guard should have some emphasis on their performance. It's who's joining them. And that's replaced a lot of dignity. It's been replaced with vulgarity, with egotism, and outrage have replaced civility, entitlement. And while individuals struggle in the private spaces of their lives, the culture itself fractures, all in the public sphere. It's not hidden. Politicians weaponize identity, dividing people into tribes and pitting them one against another. The internet erases reputations with a click. Wikipedia becomes a tool for many of destruction. Social platforms reward cruelty, not compassion and empathy. We're living not in a cultural disagreement, but in a primordial war of values, meaning, identity, existence. People walk around with a near perpetual anger. They don't understand. Outrage has become a performance art. Morality, a background for a battlefield. If I want something, I'm going to do it. But what about the consequences? I don't care about the consequences. Instant gratification. Migration reshapes the country, not gently, not thoughtfully, but chaotically. Millions arrive who do not know the culture glue that once held communities together. Assimilation in the right way, once common and to our benefit, is now contested. Entire nations, Sweden, France, Great Britain, Ireland, Spain, and yes, the United States experience tensions that no one is allowed to talk about without being labeled xenophobic or Islamophobic. We can't have civil discussion. We have entered a time when merely questioning a narrative, any narrative, is treated as a moral crime. Disagree with Israel's bombardment of Gaza, and you're called anti-Semitic. Suggest a conversation and a conversion about assimilation in the right way, and you're condemned. We have lost the ability to disagree with civility. We now argue like scorpions trapped in a cocktail glass, thrashing, venomous, frantic, unable to see the larger world. We must address these realities. But who? Only those who've already been cast out, who accepted everything the way it was until they became the victims. Now they are out there saying, I'm a victim. Well, what happened when you knew what was happening and you chose to stay silent? Right now, almost everyone who has been attacked in the orthodox medical field because their positions on COVID have now sided with the complementary group, at least making companies that sell them supplements and as if that's all that there is to being healthy. I would have been on the opposite side of every debate, with 99% of the people who are now themselves victims of the truth, because they're not just political, they're psychological and spiritual realities that we all have to face. They shape our ability to find happiness. A society in perpetual conflict cannot cultivate inner peace. I don't care where you go. Change your partner, change your location, change your job, your career, change everything in your life. You're still the problem. You take it with you. Until you can change your perceptions, the creature reality, you won't know the truth of that reality. You become a culture at war with itself, and that cannot nurture joy. Identity politics, wokeism, critical race theory, they didn't appear in a vacuum. They came into a society already weakened, disoriented, already confused, already drifting. And they took the most vulnerable, young, naive, but highly energetic individuals. And because the older generations did not speak up, did not guide, did not present councils of wise men and women there to help the younger people, they did not mentor. They did not hold the line that young people were left to navigate moral complexity with only emotional intensity and ideological slogans. What do you think the outcome is going to be? When I grew up, if any of us in our classes had a problem, we would go to the teacher afterwards. And that teacher, without exception, would ask, what's wrong at home? Almost always, is there something wrong at home? Because we were good at hiding our problems from the rest of society. And you would talk with them, and the teacher would be there as the wiser person to help us through that crisis. Today, good luck finding it. It's not that these good teachers do not exist, but at that time, the teacher knew that they were like Socrates with the students in front of them. They were helping them mold a character, a persona, a meaning and purpose. It would be great. At least everyone where I grew up knew that there was someone who cared enough about them to help them. Today, we have a lot of teachers who care about their students. But then we have schools, administrative groups that don't care about the teachers or the students. And today we have a small minority. No one knows the exact number, but let's just argument's sake say 5% of the population now demands that the other 95% surrender all your values. They're worthless, they're racist, they're xenophobic, they're terrible. Surrender your history, surrender your identity, surrender your traditions, surrender your faith, because we, young, naive individuals as we are, we have absolute confidence that you're wrong about everything you do. And so people begin to lose their jobs for refusing to conform. Young white adults are taught you should feel guilty all the time, 24/7. You're worthless because you're sinned. You have perpetual sin of being a racist. But I've never committed any racist sin. Men are told that you're inherently toxic. Women are told they are oppressed, even when they have more freedom today than in any society in world history. And more freedoms and more opportunities and more success than men. The lies continue. And then there is the irony, the greatest of all. The young generation that embraced advanced technology, that believed digital empowerment would liberate them, that celebrated artificial intelligence as progress, making our life better, has now created the very system that threatens their future, employment, dignity, and purpose. They didn't see it coming. How could they? There's no deep, introspective, quiet place where they can retreat to and start to look at what is the likely outcome of what I'm about to do. They're building the machines that will replace them, and they don't see it. So now where you had, let's say, 200,000 people working in Silicon Valley with high salaries and every possible thing that we've never had and shouldn't have had, that you come to work when you want to. Don't stress yourself. If you feel stressed at all for any reason, we have a room. We have paid psychologists and behavioralists. We have pet animals you can go into. If you feel that something, a word said, a photograph seen, may threaten your very existence in your mind. So we've planted around our campus, we've planted breakfasts and lunch and dinners and yoga and meditation. Focus on that today. Squeeze in a little work, tiny little, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours at the most. And everyone thought, I'm entitled to this. Yeah. What I just told you is reality, not a hyperbole. So we have engineered a society in which emotional reaction replaces reasoning, in which narratives replace facts, in which fragility replaces resilience. People wear their wounds like badges and condemn anyone who questions their stories. But healing cannot occur where questioning is forbidden. Growth cannot occur where discomfort is avoided. This is the environment in which people are asked to find happiness. Good luck with that. That ain't going to happen. How can they? How can a young man who is told he is inherently toxic find pride in becoming a good father? How can a young woman told she's a victim find empowerment in her accomplishments? How can a citizen told their culture is worthless, toxic, dangerous, despicable feel love for their country? How can a person told they must surrender their values feel secure in who they are? These are the questions that must be part of our conversation on happiness, because happiness does not exist in isolation from culture. It is shaped by meaning, identity, morality, purpose, and community, and our faiths. And today, all of these have been shaken. Yet in the midst of this confusion, amidst the noise and the ideological storms, one truth remains unchanged. Happiness is still possible. Happiness is still natural. Happiness is still within reach. But to find it, we must go deeper than politics, deeper than identity, deeper than technology. We must reclaim the inner compass that earlier generations took for granted. We must rediscover values that nourish the soul rather than inflame the ego. We must rebuild the inner architecture that makes life meaningful. I'm here not to criticize a generation, but to understand a civilization. I'm not here to lament the past, but to reawaken the future. Not to condemn, but to remind us all, young and old, that happiness is not a luxury. It's a birthright. And it's time we reclaimed it. Let's take a quiet moment. Let me ask you a question, not the kind you answer quickly, but one you sit with, the way you might sit with a sunrise or a memory that still carries warmth and joy. Why aren't you happy? Not the superficial happiness of a good meal or a purchase or a compliment someone tossed your way. I mean the happiness that settles into your bones, the kind that there's when you wake in the morning and lingers like a quiet hum of gratitude, that feeling. When I look at people today, whether they're in their 20s or 70s, I see a common thread, a restlessness that never quite resolves, a sense of something is missing. Yet when I ask people what they think they lack, what's missing, they almost always point outward. They tell me about the relationship they wish they had that they don't, the career that they should have taken but didn't, the money they're striving for but don't have, the body they want to reclaim, the health they once knew but abandoned, the recognition they believe they earned but haven't received. But happiness is not an external acquisition. It is an internal condition. And somewhere along the way, our culture forgot that. I grew up in a time when happiness wasn't complicated. People didn't have much, and they didn't need much. You lived by the example of your parents and grandparents, your brothers and sisters. You were expected to contribute, whether that meant mowing a lawn in the summer, as I mentioned earlier, or delivering papers at dawn, or being a Boy Scout, an Eagle Scout, a Girl Scout, an Explorer Scout. So you could learn discipline, skill, camaraderie, the importance of togetherness. You knew your place in the world, not because someone forced you into it, but because you belonged to a community with shared values, shared hardships, shared joys. Back then, nobody talked about branding yourself or optimizing your potential or curating an identity for public consumption. Your worth wasn't measured by how many likes you collected or how many credentials followed your name. A good person was simply a good person, and that was enough. Today, the landscape is different. The problem isn't just that people are stressed, it's that they're overwhelmed, overstimulated, and spiritually undernourished. They're living at a pace designed to fracture attention and dilute meaning. They're told from childhood that success must be earned through relentless striving, and that the proof of that success lies in your possessions, your status, and constant performance, your relevance. In the process, we've lost something essential, the inner stillness, where happiness naturally grows. We have to look at the life we inherited as well as the life we created. But what if we don't create a life? We simply create fulfilled expectations by others. There was a time when the measure of a good life was not how much you had, but how much you contributed to your family, your community, your faith, your own moral compass. When I think back to the working class towns of America, I think of people who lived simply, but lived well. They had enough food on the table, enough time to share with their children and in-laws and friends, enough quiet evenings to reflect on what mattered. In my small house, it was about 1,000 square feet. In the town, it was different. We had a little swing, and I would sit there with my mom, and there would be any talk just quietly on a summer night with fireflies and looking at them, and just a quiet sense of presence. And might go on for an hour. But in the country, where we went out to the McConnell's farm that my father had some interest in, to this day, I have no idea what it was. But it was a very genteel life. They had the animals. It was what was called a truck farm. And the evenings were spent in quiet conversation, or just sitting on a porch looking the Ohio River, Blenheim Island. Things were quiet. People didn't rush. Back then, quality of life meant something different. It meant a slower pace, a clear conscience, a sense of gratitude for what you already had. You didn't need dozens of distractions to numb yourself. You didn't need 1,000 channels or endless digital rabbit holes to escape into. You were taught to be content, not complacent, but content with the blessings life offered. But as the decades passed, America shifted. The culture began to equate happiness with standard of living rather than quality of life. The question silently changed from, are you fulfilled, to, are you successful? Different metrics. And success increasingly meant more and more and more. More credentials, more money, more objects, more influence, more validation. And if you're the richest man in the world, dwarfing the entire Saudi family, Elon Musk, or people like him, like Jeff Bezos, these people have all that you would ever want, and nothing that I see that you need. They're vacuous people in my mind. And yet these are the policymakers that other people, generations, want to read. How did you become so successful? How did you get it? The first ever $1 trillion contract. What have you actually contributed? And how much credit did you take that others deserve? We won't ask those questions. We just marvel in the fact that they're the ones always invited. We never see someone from another country or our own, like a farmer, saying, where do you find your happiness, your meaning, your purpose? We don't want to hear that story. Yet that's the story we listened to when I was growing up. So this shift didn't happen overnight. It crept in slowly, the ways weeds creep into a garden when you're not paying attention. First, people stopped having time for hobbies. They stopped reading as a pleasure. Then they stopped having time for friendships. Eventually, they stopped having time for their own inner lives. They became so committed to making it, succeeding, they forgot to live. So we built a society where exhaustion is a badge of honor and inner peace is treated like a luxury. A society where parents work themselves to the brink to give their children the best opportunities but offer little of their own presence. A society where children are raised to be achievers but not human beings. And then one day, the same parents look at their grown children. They're brilliant, they're educated, they're ambitious. And then you stop and wonder why they are anxious, entitled, on medications, or spiritually lost. We created a generation that knows how to succeed but does not know how to be, and now we're paying the price. I believe that we should have another look back, the great generational disconnect. So let's just take a moment. Let's talk honestly about the generational divide. Many of today's young adults grew up in homes where their parents worked themselves ragged to build a better life. And constant striving, unending pressure. These were parents who believed that they were offering love through sacrifice. And in many ways they were. But the unintended consequence was a generation deprived of shared moments, quiet conversations, joy, family rituals, emotional bonding. Children learned to aim high, but they didn't learn how to metabolize disappointment. They learned to chase accomplishments, but not how to cultivate character. They were taught to climb ladders, not how to sit still with themselves. And when a person doesn't know who they are, they go searching. They look to peers, influencers, algorithms, ideologies, and identities to tell them what matters. They become vulnerable to whatever voice is loudest, whatever is most angry, whatever is most self-righteous, whatever message is trending, whatever belief offers a sense of belonging with the least amount of introspection. So drift into entitlement because nobody taught them gratitude. Some drift into despair because nobody taught them resilience. Some drift into outrage because nobody taught them humility. And as these young people grow older, many enter adulthood lacking something previous generations took for granted. A sturdy inner life. The inner life that lets you say, I am enough. Even when I have little, I'm enough. Even when I fail. I'm enough. Even when the world is chaotic. I am not. Without that inner foundation, people look outward for meaning and they grab whatever promises to give them some security the fastest. Some turn to substances, some turn to attention seeking, some turn to ideologies that offer simple answers to complex realities. Some turn to outrage because it feels like purpose. Some turn to social validation because it feels like love. It isn't. But all of these substitutes have something in common. They never fill your void. A generation without roots cannot grow upward. A generation without tears cannot understand pure empathy and suffering. A generation without elders cannot mature. A generation without inner stillness cannot find happiness. But what we have found, and what we're seeing every day, is the degradation of the community into tribalization. This is where we must step carefully, compassionately, but truthfully, because part of the modern unhappiness epidemic emerges directly from the cultural fragmentation we are now living through. We've become a society of tribes, each suspicious of the other, each convinced it holds the moral high ground. Critical race theory, the new expressions of woke culture and identity politics were not born in a vacuum. They emerged from real historical wounds and genuine cries for justice. But in the hands of the race hustlers, in the hands of the inexperienced, in the hands of the impatient, and the ideological rigid, these movements mutated into something entirely different. A psychic cancer that would impact an entire nation. If you take a moment someday, go to my website and read any of the dozens of essays on these subjects, not to agree or disagree, but to understand the perspective I'm talking about and want to share. Because this is not an argument about justice. It is an argument against absolutism, against dogma, against spiritual negligence. How did we allow such immature, untested minds, young people still forming their worldview, to seize moral authority over the nation? Why did the elders who possessed the wisdom of history remain silent as ideological storms uprooted the cultural soil we all once stood upon? We became balkanized as a society, tribalized, weaponized. People started seeing each other less as individuals and more as categories: oppressor or oppressed, privileged or marginalized, good or evil. Nuance evaporated, dialogue disappeared, compassion was replaced with accusation, confusion was mistaken for insight, anger was mistaken for morality. And underneath all this was a profound unhappiness disguised as activism, hidden beneath the armor of certainty, burning like an unexamined grievance. How did we get here? Because when mature voices retreat, immature voices fill the vacuum. When wisdom is silent, ideology shouts. When spirituality is neglected, tribalism becomes religion. We handed a megaphone to a generation that had energy but not insight, not wisdom, passion but not perspective, grievance but not grounding. They took concepts meant for academic nuance and turned them into blunt weapons. They believed they were pursuing justice when in fact they were enforcing conformity. They gotcha, and you didn't see it coming. They believed they were dismantling oppression when they were often creating new forms of oppression: social, psychological, and linguistic oppression. And while all this was happening, the wiser older adults, those with enough life experience to guide, temper, or contextualize this movement, you stayed silent. Maybe out of fear, maybe because you're a coward, maybe out of social pressure, maybe out of shame. Whatever your reason, the cost has been enormous. In the chaos that followed, America lost something precious, a shared narrative of who we are. Into that void stepped anger, victimhood, moral absolutism, and ideological purity tests. People became terrified of speaking honestly. Friendships fractured, institutions caved under pressure. The culture split into warring camps, each certain the other was the enemy. And now we find ourselves living in a soft psychological version of Orwell's 1984, where language is policed, history is rewritten, memory is manipulated, and dissent is punished. A society where fear replaces curiosity and conformity replaces courage. How can anyone be happy in such an environment? You cannot achieve inner harmony in a culture that thrives on division. You cannot cultivate peace when you are constantly preparing for ideological battle. You cannot feel whole when taught to define yourself by fragments. But here's the deeper tragedy. Beneath all these is a noise. It's a collective longing, a longing for fairness, belonging, purpose, and dignity. These moments grew from unmet emotional needs, but without wisdom to guide them, they morphed into engines of unhappiness. And it will take wisdom, real wisdom, generational wisdom to heal what has been broken. And hence the age of illusion. If you want to understand why so many people feel unmoored today, you have to recognize the scale and sophistication of the illusions surrounding us. We live inside an illusion industrial complex, a coordinated ecosystem of marketing and media and entertainment and psychology and the cult of personalities, and now artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and automation, all designed to sell us a version of happiness or need that has nothing to do with the real world. Most people don't realize they've been programmed since birth. They think they're making free choices, setting independent goals, pursuing unique aspirations. But how free can those choices be when billions of dollars are spent every year studying how to manipulate your desires, trigger your fears, capture your attention, and monetize your insecurities? Everywhere you look, you're nudged. Everything you engage in or with has a motive behind it. Every screen you touch has already studied you before you touch it. Modern unhappiness is not an accident. It is the predictable outcome of a culture engineered to keep you dissatisfied, because dissatisfaction keeps you consuming. A happy person is a terrible consumer. A centered person is an unresponsive target. A grounded person is immune to manipulation. So the illusion makers must keep you chasing a better body, a bigger home, a shinier identity, a more enviable life. They're not selling products. They're selling the promise of becoming a person who finally feels whole. And you believe it. They pour their energy into acquiring symbols of success instead of cultivating the substance of well-being. They treat themselves as brands instead of souls. They trade the inward journey for the outward performance. But what happens when you wake up one morning and the illusion no longer satisfies? What happens when you achieve everything you were told to pursue and the emptiness is still there? What happens when the applause stops and the silence feels unbearable? This is the crisis of our time. A population that has achieved more outward comfort than any generation before it, and yet feels spiritually starved. Illusions don't just fail to nourish you, they drain you. They create a hunger that can never be satisfied, because the hunger itself was manufactured. There's only one cure for illusion, and it's not more striving. The cure is truth. Truth about who you are and who you're not. But most people fear the truth. They fear the stillness that would reveal it. They fear the responsibility that comes with it. And so they stay in motion, hoping constant activity, constant distraction will quiet them. That's the honest voice inside, but it never works. We cannot talk about modern illusion without addressing the most powerful illusion-generating machine humanity has ever created, artificial intelligence. AI is extraordinary. It will revolutionize medicine, education, science, agriculture, communication, every field we know. It will also potentially be devastating psychologically, spiritually, and socially if we don't approach it with awareness. But no one in the field is approaching it with awareness. It's unmitigated greed. Young people today must hear this clearly. Just because something is technologically advanced does not mean it's morally evolved. AI does not possess wisdom, compassion, or conscience. AI does not understand meaning or purpose. AI does not love and cannot teach you how to love. Sounds like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, doesn't it? At least to me, that's my belief. It can predict your behavior, but it cannot guide your soul. What troubles me most is how many bright young minds are sharing the future with no awareness of the consequences. They're building systems so powerful, these systems will eventually replace them. Imagine someone so disconnected from reality that they cannot see they're building the machinery of their own obsolescence. This is not science fiction. It's already happening. Journalism, marketing, design, software development, legal research, entire professions are being reconstructed, automated, or erased by the very people who entered these professions just a decade or less ago. The irony is almost cruel. The generation that championed technology as liberation now finds it trapped by its competing with algorithms for relevance. But the psychological costs may be even greater than the economic one. AI saturates life with convenience, but convenience is poison when it replaces capability. AI offers answers instantly, but wisdom cannot be downloaded. AI mirrors your preferences, but spiritual growth requires confronting what you don't prefer. AI simulates connection, but connection without vulnerability is not human. What happens to a culture when people outsource their thinking, their remembering, their decision-making, their creativity, their communication? What happens to a generation whose emotional lives are shaped by algorithms that do not understand emotion? You get people who know everything except themselves. You get efficiency without meaning. You get intelligence without wisdom. You get progress without purpose. And in that environment, happiness becomes elusive because happiness is a product of engagement, not automation. Happiness grows from the work of living, not from having life streamlined for you. This is a paradox of AI. The more life becomes automated, the more the soul must become intentional. Young people must reclaim what technology cannot give them: intuition, empathy, resilience, courage, purpose, and the ability to sit with discomfort long enough to grow from it. Right now, that's about a millisecond. AI may shape the future, but it cannot shape your humanity. Only you can do that. And finally, let us return to the inner self. After decades of watching thousands of people struggle with unhappiness, I've come to a simple but powerful understanding. Unhappiness is not caused by what you lack. It is caused by what you have accumulated that is not truly you. Think of your life as a field. Over time, weeds grow, debris blows in. Old roots rot beneath the soil. Without tending, the field becomes tangled and impenetrable. This is what happens to the inner self. You accumulate roles: worker, achiever, provider, parent, activist, performer. You accumulate identities: political, religious, professional, cultural. You accumulate expectations: your parents, your peers, your societies, your algorithms. You accumulate wounds: childhood memories, heartbreaks, betrayals, disappointments. You accumulate distractions: endless stimulation, digital noise, ideological battles, constant comparisons. And then you look inward and wonder why everything feels dim. People come to me after saying, "Gary, I don't know who I am anymore." And I tell them, that's because you become a collection of everything except yourself. We are conditioned from childhood to believe that identity equals labels. I'm this, I'm that. I belong to this group. I align with that cause. But labels describe, they do not define. Labels categorize, they do not illuminate. Labels restrict, they do not expand. And yet people cling to them as if their very existence depended upon it. They build psychological cages and then wonder why they feel trapped. Think carefully about this. The moment you accept a label as your identity, you stop being curious about who you really are. Most of the suffering I see today is not because people lack opportunities. It's because they lack authenticity. They have abandoned the inner self to become the acceptable self, the presentable self, the socially approved self. And here is the heartfelt truth. You cannot be happy while impersonating yourself. Let me repeat that. You might want to write it down for introspection. You cannot be happy while impersonating yourself. Happiness requires congruence. Congruence requires honesty. Honesty requires courage. It takes courage to say, this belief is not mine. This expectation does not serve me. This label does not fit. This path is not aligned with my spirit. This resentment is poisoning me. This identity is borrowed, not earned. This outrage is not coming from my heart, but from my programming. When you reclaim your inner self, you reclaim your happiness, not instantly, not magically, but inevitably, because happiness is not something you achieve. It is something you uncover. It is already there. It's been there all along, waiting for you to open that door beneath the noise and all of the false expectations and pretenses and illusions. So on upcoming programs, on upcoming discussions, I'll share what happens when we start opening doors that illusions told us don't open that, and we should. If you found any value in what I've just shared, please share it with others. You can be watching this on a Gary Null YouTube channel. Remember, you're not the sum of your labels. You're not the sum of your wounds. You're not the sum of your illusions. You're something far more endearing, far more luminous, far more capable of happiness than the world has led you to believe. So next, I'm going to clear the inner field, a whole different discussion, an essay. And I have almost 1,000 articles I've written, some peer review, a lot of them scientific. But at this moment, I will continue to write white papers on important social and, let's say, scientific topics. I'll continue to deconstruct the lies we've been told about science. I'll continue to produce new documentaries. But more than ever, I believe we need now to take an inner journey, since our entire lives now are based upon external expectations and experiences. So expect a lot more of these coming at you. All right? Something I started in 1975. That's when I did my first Mastering Life lecture. And in the last 3 weeks, I've done 11 of these. Share them with others. Thank you, and have a good day.